So firstly, I'm very happy to introduce Alana Perino. Alana Perino's artistic practice engages with the entanglements of home, family, and heritage. Simultaneously an only child and the youngest of seven children, Alana grew up in New York City, the North Fork of Long Island, and the stretch of highway between the two. They studied European intellectual history and photography at Wesleyan University before completing the MFA photography program at RISD. Alana resides on the unceded land of the Pokanoket, Wampanoag, and Narragansett in Providence, Rhode Island, where they currently serve as assistant professor at Johnson & Wales University. So welcome, Alana. So I invite you to share your screen, and we're looking forward to your talk.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you so much for having me today for this talk. Thank you, everybody, for being here. First of all, I'd like to say that it has been an absolute pleasure to be part of this fellowship, completely dreamy, to be in community with all of these wonderful makers and to be a small part of the Silver Eye Center for this little while, to be in virtual space and physical space for the time that I was there. An honor and a pleasure. And I'm glad to be here again with you all today. So I'll speak a little bit about my practice right now, and I'll start here. This is a photograph of my father. It was sort of a jumping off point for this body of work, which, if you read the introduction for this talk, is very much about family, home, and belonging, but it also is very much about death and coming to terms with mortality's inevitability and the changes and transformations that come with that, both physical, metaphysical, spiritual, etc. It's it's very timely for me to be doing this talk now, and for me to be doing this fellowship now. I actually just buried my father approximately a week ago, and 2 days ago finished sitting Shiva for him. So I've been thinking a lot about him. I mean, I always think about him, but particularly I've been thinking about him this week and all of the wonderful memories that we have. And I'm grateful to have made this work in the last few years that we had together and that we got to spend so much rich time making art. So the way that the work started is sort of in relationship with this island, and this island is called Longboat Key. It's an island off of the west coast of Florida. It's a barrier reef island. The the picture on the left gives you an idea of the varied floral fauna ecological aspects of this island and like just how beautiful it is. My father and stepmother chose to retire here, as sort of as I always thought about it, they chose to live their last few years there and to die there. And I always thought this was I mean, it's a strange thing that we do as a species, first of all, but just as a culture and as a people, that we choose where we die. And this was something that I thought a lot about when I would visit them here in this spot. And I started making the photographs, particularly when the two of them, and this is them right here, my father and my stepmother, were, as I was perceiving it, very much nearing their last few years. My stepmother had early onset Alzheimer's when she was 65, which is the age that she is in this photograph. And I kind of anticipated that my father, who was much older than her, would follow her not long after, sort of in the way that some couples who are very, very close and have a very loving relationship, when one passes, one doesn't quite remain long after, which is exactly what happened. And I began making photos. I began making photos of the house. I began making photos of the people living in the house. One of the people living in the house at the time was my niece, who was the daughter of my sister, Lori, who is a nurse and taking care of my stepmother, who could not be cared for by my father. He was too old. And I started photographing in a sense as a way to preserve the time, but also in a sense to come to terms with what it means to live in a house that is transitioning as a place that's occupied with life to a place that's occupied with this idea of death. And perhaps death is just around the corner, but perhaps death is also just covertly occupying the stairs as it rounds in the corner with this like ascension chair because, you know, we can't walk anymore because we're too old to do something like that. And the way that, eventually perhaps all of us are going to be too old to walk something like that, even someone as young as Maddie here in this picture, who I believe was perhaps 12 when I made this image. We spent a lot of time going to the aquarium when I was younger, but also when I was a little bit older, I would try to get out of the house because it was a little bit emotionally intense. And I also began thinking about the aquarium as and the little spaces that were created, these homes for the different creatures, as these different units, these different condos like you see on the island, and these spaces that serve as spaces of protection, the way that even the island functions as a barrier reef island, the way that the island functions to protect the mainland, the way that the glass functions to protect it from other sorts of species, the way that the windows in the houses that we live in Florida, especially around the coasts, are hurricane windows to protect us from the hurricanes that frequently come and go, and how there's so much overlap, even though we really separate ourselves between the plants and the animals and the bugs and the no-see-ums, etc. I also started a practice of self-portraiture, which up until this moment I really had not ever touched before. I started it because it was beginning to feel a little bit dishonest to not include my own image in the work, especially since I was so incredibly enmeshed with these people. It became incredibly important for my practice in general, and I'm really grateful that I started it, even though it is sometimes difficult for me to look at the pictures of myself. Um, Sometimes I feel that the portraits that I make are of other people are more self-portraits, and the pictures that I make of myself are more a picture of an object or a piece of furniture. But that's, something for between me and my therapist that I can talk about, later on. I also made lots of pictures of seashells because I was really, again, as I was speaking to that plant in the case, I was really starting to think about the ways in which we are so similar to all of the beings around us. My stepmother collected seashells while she was alive. She died while I made this project. And when I was younger, it used to really make me nervous because I thought of the seashells almost as little corpses. There are things that live inside seashells, and when you bring home a seashell, even a seashell that doesn't have a living thing inside, it is a remnant of a body that once had a soul of a thing. And I always felt that when we were bringing these objects home, that we were almost bringing home ghosts with us. And I was really nervous about the the potential of being haunted by all of these little creatures throughout the house. But I mean, it's something that I have taken on. I collect shells every once in a while, but I really do contend with this idea. Am I willing to be haunted by this little creature? Sometimes I try to feel out the vibe of the creatures, like, are you an angry creature? But this is my sister's shell that she brought home with her. It's a photograph of my stepmother. She did not like to have her image made, and I really only made two images of her and only two images of her hands. She could not have consented, or not consented for that matter, to this photograph at the time. She was mostly nonverbal. What she did verbalize at this moment was that she would talk to people in the room, which was not unusual for her. She and many of my family members would speak to ghosts who were present in the space. And uh, so, on one hand, it was odd to have her speak so often to these entities, but on the other hand, it was almost as if in this liminal space between life and death, she had more and more and more access to talking to ancestors and to angels, etc. I call them ghosts, but she really called them angels, and my sister also called them angels. And so this is my sister, and this tattoo is an homage to her mother, but also an homage to, the matrilinealness of the line of family that she honors so much. Her children's names are written in the center of her back. Sometimes the pictures of the objects for me also are portraits. For me, this is less a picture of a piece of furniture and more a picture of Letty's mother. This object, this curio belonged to Letty's mother. And I always felt that sort of like the shells that Letty's mother really lived inside of that curio. I kind of said goodnight to it because it was in the room where I was sleeping when I was living there. Every night I would say, "Good night, Tilly." Because to me, and I think to everybody in the family, she lived in that curio. And this is my niece, who, sort of in the spirit of ghosts and angels and such, I feel like here looks like a sea monster, which is so incredibly telling of the culture of the island, right? There's not so much pictures of the slideshow. The slideshow would be too long, but um, there are also images in the project of statues of that represent the Greek mythological gods, and many of these are Neptune and sea nymphs and other kinds of creatures that sort of stand in like this funny place in Italian and like Greek culture between Catholicism and mythology that I always found to be a strange sort of mesh of spiritualism of the place. And this is one of the last photographs I ever made of my father. I made it in the last visit to Longboat Key. He moved very shortly after I made this picture. He moved to North Carolina to be with my older sister, who took care of him before, up until he died, a different sister. I have many siblings. And I made another picture of him in the hospital a few days before he passed. But that picture very much, I think, is for me, and I don't think I will ever show that picture to anybody. This is the Gulf of Mexico near their house. When the family left Longboat Key, they sold the house, and so everyone left with that house. Nobody remains there anymore. And so I don't expect to return to make any more pictures. For me, the process of the photography is very much done for this work. And now I'm in the like enthrallment of putting together book mock-ups and trying to make sense of what exhibitions can look like and what pairings look like, writing about it, etc., looking at negatives, that sort of thing. After everybody left, literally a week after everybody left, two hurricanes hit the island in 1 week. So 1 week after they left, two hurricanes within that 1 week struck the island, and it was disastrous, absolutely disastrous. I haven't been back because I'm, again, not really interested in photographing that kind of thing. I don't have family there. Um, we don't have the home there anymore. And it feels like the disaster isn't really part of our family anymore. Although I feel a connection to the home it belongs to somebody else. I tried to look for pictures of the house after the hurricane, but I couldn't find anything. All I could really find were pictures of piles of sand that were sort of dropped haphazardly along the sides of the road from the beach. So when I reflect now on the work that I made, and I'm making and sharing so much of it into the world now that he has passed, and now that Letty has passed, it feels like such an incredible blessing that I got to do this and I got to make this work. But so much of it was such a process of understanding not only what death could mean for them, but what also like death could mean for me. And not just how tender and devastating it is, but also how beautiful it is that we get to cherish such a short time together, even if it is a long time. My father lived to be 88 years old, which is that's a that's a lifetime. That's a beautiful, beautiful lifetime. And he got to do so many things and see so many things and be so many things. And now he gets to be something completely different, which is incredible. When I started this project, I had this rule that I wasn't going to make any pictures of birds, which is a strange thing because the project is called Pictures of Birds. The reason for that rule was because when I began, my stepmother, who was still quite cognizant and verbal, she would repeat often what she said, and she would see me walking around the house taking pictures of chairs and silverware and blankets and things that didn't really make any sense to her. And she would constantly say to me, "Why don't you make pictures of birds? Why don't you make pictures of birds?" Which made a lot of sense because there were beautiful birds on the island. So, so, so many beautiful birds. There are so many beautiful birds because it's a place where all of these migratory species come and go and come and go. And for me, it was a challenge to see the place in a different way. Eventually, I kind of let go and started making pictures of birds, but really only after I had started seeing almost everything as a bird. The ghosts were birds. My ancestors who were talking to Letty as she was dying in the bed were birds. Even things like the chairs and the silverware were birds. These sort of creatures that exist on the earthly plane, but also between the celestial plane, and they go up and down between the two worlds, and they communicate with both. And now my dad's a bird, which is beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Alana, for your generosity in sharing with us about making that work and your reflections on it now today as you remember and honor your father. Thank you. So now I'm going to introduce Paolo Morales. Paolo's work investigates the documentary tradition. His photographs have featured in 8 solo exhibitions and numerous group exhibitions. Morales received an MFA from Rhode Island School of Design and is a visiting assistant professor at Bucknell University, although I think that may have changed, Paolo, recently. Apologies. He was born and raised in New York City and lives with his wife and corgi in Philadelphia. So welcome, Paolo, and we're looking forward to your talk.
Thank you. That was a really moving talk, Alana. Thank you for sharing that. Just gonna share my screen. Thank you to Helen and Leo for organizing the event. And yeah, it was really wonderful to hear about your family, Alana, and I'm thinking a lot about that. And I thank you for sharing those beautiful pictures. Tonight, I will describe my project titled Balikbayan. And in that project, I will describe an intuitive, subjective, documentary approach to photography. My work imagines and celebrates a multiracial photographic world where people long to care for others. I was born and raised in New York City. This is where I first learned about photography in the seventh grade, where I learned to print in the darkroom, and where I continue to visit and take pictures today. Before showing my series, Balikbayan, which is the project on view at Silver Eye, I thought I would begin with some introductions to some of the people in my family and how they taught me the value of care. This is a picture of me with my parents and my aunt, who I call Tita Linda. My father, like myself, was born and raised in New York. His parents, or my grandparents, immigrated from the Philippines, just like my mother, before she got married. So, in that way, I see myself as a 2.5 generation immigrant. And I call attention to this because my mother and Tita Linda are some of the stars in my series Balikbayan that I'll be discussing tonight. And I also showed this picture because these individuals, along with others, were the people who raised me. My mother and Tita Linda talk almost every day. Now, as an adult, I have come to realize that their relationship taught me and continues to teach me what it means to support and love one another. This is a picture of my father and I in Virginia a few years ago. Whenever my dad would drive me around somewhere as a child, I remember the way he would put his arm in front of me before he had to quickly press on the brakes. Even now, as an adult, this picture taken by my wife is a moment when my dad's arm is in front of me, protecting me from the horse. This is a picture with my grandfather, who was my dad's dad. He immigrated from the Philippines to New York City in the 1940s to practice medicine. This is my grandfather and grandmother. I remember going to visit them in Queens, which is a borough of New York, and watching my grandfather sitting exactly where he is in this picture, hold my grandmother's hand as she slept. This is a picture of my wife and my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law cooks for almost every meal. Food and nourishment are some of the many ways that she shows care and love for her family. This is a photograph of my wife, Hyoan, and me on our wedding day. Just as an aside, I asked for this picture to be made because of this photograph of Bob Dylan by Richard Avedon, a picture that I love and loved for as long as I can remember. Balikbayan, the pictures featured in the Fellowship 25 exhibition at the Silver Eye Center for Photography. When I was growing up, my mother and I would travel from New York City to the Philippines to visit relatives every summer. In the past 12 years, so once in 2013 and again in 2024, I made the trip twice, and many of the pictures from my project were made there, along with many others in the United States. This is a picture of my mother that I took when we were visiting the Philippines in 2013. I made this picture right before going to graduate school. This picture is about care and is what I investigate through these photographs. My wife taking care of a hand wound. These are my twin uncles, Tito Kaloy and Tito Nestor. The young boy on the right corner is my cousin's son. His name is Gio. This picture was made in 2013. Another one, and Gio again in 2024, hanging off of a staircase. Touching the hand of a person older than you with your forehead is a sign of respect in the Philippines to an elder person. The title of my project, Balikbayan, is a word in Tagalog, the native language of the Philippines. In English, Balikbayan loosely translates to a Filipino person returning to the home country. So, in that way, these pictures are made with people and in moments where I feel like I belong. This picture is of my mother-in-law cooking. The smoke makes it feel like, to me, that she's doing magic. I remember sharing this work with a critic group recently in Philadelphia, and a question that I'm thinking about now is how care is racialized. In other words, what does it mean to care for another person? And what does it mean, in particular, to care for another person in an Asian country? The larger question motivating my work is what a racialized photograph looks and feels like. When reflecting on the ways that Evans's pictures are the product of a white male vision, and the ways that Fraser's pictures are from the point of view of a Black woman, I seek to describe my work as a racialized vision of the world through the positionality of an Asian American male. The Philippines is quite hot and humid in the summer. Here's a picture that I made one afternoon at lunch. My wife is trying to cool down in front of the fan while Tita Linda looks at the camera. That's in an airport in Korea. My hope for these pictures is to investigate my own positionality as an Asian American male, and more broadly, how race and gender can be reflected in photographs. There is a history in American photography of white men photographing their spouses. Harry Callahan's pictures of his wife Eleanor and Emma Gowan, who photographed his wife Edith, are just two examples. I see my work as adding to this history by including Asian bodies into the narrative. Harry Callahan started the photography program at RISD in 1961, and Emma Gowan was a student. And as a graduate of the same program, I hope my work contends with, acknowledges, and adds to this tradition. A few weeks ago, my wife and I were visiting my parents in New York. She was looking at a book called The Model Wife, a book edited by Arthur Ullman, and she said she recognized this moment of a figure floating in water as a kind of vernacular image. I hope my pictures challenge the vernacular to consider how race affects the reading and understanding of a picture. These two pictures are not in the series. However, they represent my material investigations of how I print photographs. So on the slide, notice the way the print on the left has a warmer tint which is a silver gelatin print from an optical negative enlargement. And the print on the right has a slightly cooler tint, which is an inkjet print from a digitally exposed file. Now, I am making digital negatives from digitally exposed files and then making contact prints on fiber-based paper from those negatives in the darkroom. In other words, I seek to advance the medium of photography by mixing analog and digital processes, all from the positionality of an Asian American male. My mother at least 10 years ago, my mother again in 2024. One of the things that I love about photography is the way that it documents and describes people over long periods of time. Just a few landscapes. That's in Tita Linda's garden. My mother's best friend from grade school while she's blowing into a golden whistle. My mother overlooking generations of women in our family. I am interested in physical care between family members, but also I'm interested in investigating how care is a kind of service. My mom giving a guard dog a bath. Tita Linda getting a manicure and pedicure. And my wife holding on to our dog as he struggles to learn to swim. Since graduate school, the presentations of my work have generally been in a straight line on the wall, all printed the same size. Working with Helen and Leo has been an empowering process as an artist. They challenged me to break out of the mold of the straight line on the wall. So this installation exemplifies the intuitive nature of my work. I make pictures by responding to the world in front of me, translating situations into harmonious and descriptive images. Then I try to continue to shape meaning in both the editing or selection of images, which can be further filtered through the way they are hung on the wall. So I'm showing this work in a non-linear way to encourage viewers to draw connections and to see the artist's hand in the installation on the wall. And this is the final installation in the gallery. The size of the pictures and their arrangement speak to analysis and intent. The smaller pictures show care through food or physical touch, and the large center photograph shows both those things in a single image. And just a few more pictures before I end. This picture does what I hope the entire project does, which is to show people physically caring for each other in a beautifully described photographic moment. And that's the final picture. Thank you for listening.